Sophia Grant had everything. The money, the power, a company worth billions of dollars. But she didn't have the one thing she wanted most. Someone who would love her for exactly who she was, not for what she owned or what she could offer. So she walked away from her world, cut every tie, pretended to be a woman with nothing, and started over from scratch in a city where no one knew her name. When she met Caleb Turner, a quiet single father who put his 6-year-old daughter above every other thing in his life, she thought she had finally found her answer. Then, one morning, a long fleet of black cars lined his street. Suited bodyguards stood at his door, and every truth she had built her feelings on began to fall apart. What would you do if the person you loved was hiding something even bigger than you? By 29, Sophia Grant had already done what most people spend a lifetime trying to accomplish. She had taken a small software startup left to her by her late father and turned it into one of the most talked-about technology companies in the country. The headquarters stood 42 floors above the city, and when she walked through those glass doors every morning, every person in the building moved differently, stood straighter, spoke quieter, chose their words more carefully. She had earned that. She had worked for it across 7 years of 18-hour days and decisions that kept her awake until 3 in the morning. The corner office, the penthouse apartment, the private car, none of it had been handed to her. Every square foot of it had a cost. But there was a different kind of cost she had stopped talking about out loud. The last man she had dated, a venture capitalist she met at a charity dinner, had seemed different in the beginning. Thoughtful, unhurried. He asked about her childhood, her fears, the books on her nightstand. She had let herself believe, for almost 5 months, that he saw her. Then, one afternoon, her chief of staff placed a folder on her desk, without saying a word. Inside were emails. The man she had trusted had been in quiet conversations with 2 of her board members, feeding them internal information about upcoming product decisions. He was positioning himself to buy shares before a public announcement. He had never been interested in the woman. He had been working the angle. She didn't cry. She signed the papers that removed him from her life and her building in the same afternoon. But something shifted inside her that day. Something that didn't shift back. After him, there were others. A musician who dropped her name at every dinner party. A tech journalist who started taking notes after the 3rd date. A man she met through a mutual friend who, within 2 weeks, casually mentioned that his startup was struggling and that he had always admired her ability to spot potential. Each one taught her the same lesson in a different font. When you are the wealthiest person in every room you walk into, you stop being a person to most people. You become an opportunity. So Sophia did something that no one in her position was supposed to do. She sat with the idea for 3 weeks, alone in her apartment, before she made the decision official. She called her most trusted deputy and said she was taking a leave of absence. Health reasons, she told the board. Stress and burnout, which wasn't entirely untrue. She packed 2 bags, left her credit cards in the apartment safe, and arranged for a modest amount of cash to be accessible through a plain checking account under a simplified version of her name. She rented a 1-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood she had never visited, 2 bus rides from downtown, with a corner laundromat and a coffee shop that smelled like cinnamon and burnt espresso. She got a job at that coffee shop the same week, working the morning shift, wearing an apron that smelled like steamed milk by noon. She told the owner her name was Sophie, that she was between jobs, and that she was good with early mornings. Nobody there had any reason to look at her twice. That was exactly what she needed. She told herself it was a social experiment, a way to test who she was without the weight of everything she had built around herself. But if she was honest, which she rarely was about this particular subject, it was also grief. She was grieving the version of love she had stopped believing in. And she had decided, quietly and with her jaw set, that she would either find proof it existed or accept once and for all that it did not. Caleb Turner first walked into the cafe on a Tuesday morning in early October, holding the hand of a small girl in a yellow raincoat. Sophia was behind the counter, filling a paper cup with drip coffee, when the door swung open. The man was tall, with the kind of build that came from physical work rather than a gym membership. He wore dark jeans, a gray sweatshirt that had been washed too many times, and boots that had seen at least 2 winters. He wasn't trying to look like anything. He walked in the way most people walk through a door they've used 100 times without performance, without a rival. The little girl at his side was looking at everything at once: the pastry case, the chalk menu board, the stuffed bear on the shelf above the register. She had her father's dark eyes, and a gap between her 2 front teeth that made her smile look like a small accident. "The usual?" Sophia asked, without meaning to. The man glanced up. "I've never been here before." Sophia blinked. "Sorry." "What can I get you?" "Small black coffee," he said. Then he looked down at the girl. "And whatever she wants. Within reason," he added. More to the girl than to Sophia. The girl studied the pastry case with the seriousness of someone negotiating a contract. "The one with the pink frosting. That's a birthday cake donut," Sophia said. "It's very pink." "I know," the girl said, completely satisfied. His name, Sophia found out over the next few visits, was Caleb. The girl's name was Emily, and she was 6 years old and very certain about most things. Caleb worked in property maintenance or so, he said, and he brought Emily to the cafe twice a week before dropping her at school, always arriving at 7:45, always ordering the same small black coffee, always letting Emily take her time choosing a pastry as though the decision genuinely mattered. What struck Sophia first was what he didn't do. He didn't linger at the counter to talk to her. He didn't ask where she was from or what she did before this job. He didn't comment on her appearance or find reasons to stay past his coffee. When she made a mistake on his order one morning and gave him a medium instead of a small, he simply said thank you and sat down anyway. When she apologized, he waved it off like it hadn't registered as a problem. He was, in every visible way, completely uninterested in impressing her. In Sophia's experience, men who looked like Caleb, or more accurately, men who had something behind their eyes the way he did, always found a way to let you know they were interesting. They dropped something, a reference, a story, a question engineered to sound casual. Caleb never did any of that. He read a paperback while Emily ate her donut. He listened to his daughter talk about her teacher with the full attention of someone who had nowhere else to be. He tipped exactly $1 every time, folded once. One afternoon, Emily left a drawing on the counter, a crayon sketch of the coffee shop, with a small figure behind the counter that had long hair and a yellow apron. Beneath it, in shaky capital letters, "Sophie." Sophia kept it. She tucked it under the counter and told herself she would throw it away later. She never did. It started the way most things that matter start, slowly and without announcement. One evening in mid-October, Sophia was walking home from her shift when the back left tire of her second-hand bicycle went flat 3 blocks from her apartment. She had been borrowing the bike from her landlord, and she had exactly no tools, no knowledge of how to fix a flat, and approximately 22 minutes before the hardware store on the corner closed. She was standing on the sidewalk, considering her options, when Caleb's truck pulled up to the curb. He leaned out the window. "That looks like a problem. I'm managing," she said. He was out of the truck before she finished the sentence. He fixed the tire in 12 minutes, using a small kit he kept in the back of his truck. A pump? A patch? A pair of small pliers he handled with the ease of someone who had used them 1,000 times. Emily sat in the passenger seat with the window down, explaining to a passing dog why it should probably go home. Caleb didn't make a production of fixing the tire. He didn't wait for gratitude or find a way to make her feel like she owed him something. When he finished, he stood up, said that'll hold until you get it properly replaced, and started walking back to his truck. "Let me pay you," Sophia said. "Don't worry about it. I want to." He looked at her for a moment. Something quiet, moving behind his expression. "Buy Emily a birthday cake donut tomorrow. That's enough." She bought Emily too. After that, something between them softened, not dramatically, not the way it happens in the stories people tell about falling in love. It was quieter than that. Caleb started staying a few minutes longer at the counter in the mornings, not to flirt, just to talk about the neighborhood, about a book he was reading, about a street festival coming up the following weekend. Sophia found herself looking forward to 7:45 in a way she hadn't looked forward to anything in years. He invited her to dinner exactly once, and he did it the way you'd invite a neighbor plainly, with no weight behind it. He had made too much pasta, he said, and Emily had specifically requested that the lady from the coffee shop be allowed to try it. Sophia laughed for the first time in what felt like months. That evening, sitting at a small kitchen table covered in Emily's drawings, eating pasta that Caleb had made from a recipe his mother had written down on a note card, Sophia felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Ordinary. Not special, not powerful, not watched. Just a person at a table with food and conversation, and a 6-year-old who kept trying to teach her a card game she had clearly just invented. Somewhere between the pasta and the made-up card game, Sophia caught herself thinking the thought she had been carefully avoiding. If she told him the truth right now, everything would change. He would look at her differently. The table would mean something different. Even the pasta would taste different once he knew what she was. She told herself she needed more time, that she was still gathering information, that the experiment wasn't finished. But the truth, the one she hadn't admitted yet even to herself, was simpler and harder than that. She wasn't protecting the experiment anymore. She was protecting this. Emily Turner had a way of asking questions that left no room for evasion. She was 6 years old, which meant she had not yet learned the social skill of pretending not to notice things. She noticed everything, and saw no reason not to say so directly. One Saturday morning when Sophia came into the cafe on her day off just to get coffee, she told herself, just because it was close. Emily was sitting at the corner table with a coloring book, and an intensity of focus that made the whole room feel quieter. "You're here, but you're not working," Emily observed. "Even people who work somewhere are allowed to visit," Sophia said. Emily considered this. "My dad goes to the hardware store even when he doesn't need anything." "Does he?" "He says he likes the smell." Emily returned to her coloring. Then, without looking up, "Do you have a family?" Sophia sat down across from her. "What do you mean? Like, a mom and a dad, and maybe a little sister? Or brothers?" "I don't have brothers. I just have my dad." She said it with zero sadness, simply reporting the facts as she understood them. "My mom lives somewhere far away. She sends cards on my birthday, but she doesn't visit. My dad says some people love you from a distance, and that's still love." Sophia was quiet for a moment. "Your dad sounds smart." "He is. He also cries during movies, but only the sad animal ones." Emily held up her coloring book to examine her work. "Do you have a family?" "I have a company," Sophia said before she could stop herself. Emily looked at her with the mild puzzlement of someone who had been given an answer to a different question. "That's not the same thing." "No," Sophia agreed. "It's not." She thought about that conversation for days afterward. Not because it had revealed anything she didn't know, but because a 6-year-old had said out loud what she had spent years arranging her schedule to avoid hearing. The company was real. The board meetings were real. The 42 floors and the glass offices and the quarterly reports were all real. But they didn't ask her if she was cold. They didn't save a drawing for her. They didn't explain, very seriously, that sad animal movies were a legitimate reason to cry. She started spending more time with Emily, not by design, but because Emily simply expected her presence in a way that made absence feel like a choice Sophia was actively making. They walked to the park on Sundays while Caleb fixed something around the apartment. They looked at picture books at the library on Thursday afternoons. Emily told Sophia about every person in her class, assigning them character traits with the confidence of a novelist. "Marcus talks too much during math," Emily said one afternoon. "But he's funny, so it's okay." "People can be two things at once," Sophia said. Emily nodded sagely. "My dad says that too." It was the first time Sophia had allowed herself to imagine very briefly, very quietly, in the way you imagine something you're afraid to want, what it would feel like to be part of this small world permanently, not visiting it, not observing it, actually belonging to it. The thought arrived in her chest like something warm and entirely unwelcome. She pushed it aside and poured Emily another glass of juice. It was a small thing. The first time. Caleb had left a newspaper on the kitchen counter one morning. One of those financial papers, the kind with dense columns of figures and analysis. Emily had knocked her orange juice across half of it. And while Sophia helped clean up, she saw what was open on the page. It wasn't the news section. It wasn't the local listings. It was a long analytical piece about emerging markets in Southeast Asia. The kind of article that assumed a very particular level of financial literacy in its reader. "Bit heavy for a Sunday morning," Sophia said, not quite casually. Caleb glanced at it. Old habit. He folded the paper and moved it to the recycling bin without elaboration. But Sophia had noticed. She filed it away. The way she filed everything she wasn't ready to think about yet. In a part of her mind that she left untouched for now. Over the next few weeks, she noticed more. Caleb spoke about construction work and maintenance jobs with the kind of specific, convincing detail that only came from someone who had actually done the work. But occasionally, between sentences about grout and load-bearing walls, he would say something that didn't quite fit, a passing reference to currency hedging, a comment about interest rate decisions and what they meant for real estate valuations. A quiet, almost unconscious observation about a regional acquisition that had been in the financial news that week. Each time, he pulled back quickly, moved the conversation somewhere else, refilled a coffee cup, changed the subject with a practiced ease that, in retrospect, looked less like distraction and more like training. There were phone calls, too. Sophia noticed them because they happened at odd hours and always seemed to require him to step outside. He never raised his voice. He never seemed agitated when he came back in, but there was something in his posture when he returned, a residual straightening, a small tightening in the jaw that was gone within 30 seconds, that didn't belong to a man who was just talking to a contractor about a plumbing estimate. One evening in late November, Caleb left after dinner and said he'd be back within an hour. He was gone for nearly 4. When he returned, Emily was asleep on the couch, and Sophia was sitting at the kitchen table reading. He came in quietly, and she almost didn't look up. But she did, and in the hallway light, she could see a shallow cut along his forearm, already cleaned and taped with medical precision. "What happened?" she asked. "I caught a nail on a fence post." "At 10:30 at night?" He looked at her steadily. "The owner called last minute. Emergency job." The answer was too ready, too complete. In her years of running a company, she had sat across tables from hundreds of people who were managing information, selecting what to give and what to hold back. She recognized that quality in a person. She recognized it now. She didn't push it. She handed him a glass of water and said good night. But lying in her apartment that night, staring at the ceiling, she let herself ask the question she had been orbiting for weeks. Who was Caleb Turner, actually? Not the man at 7:45 with the gray sweatshirt. Not the man who fixed tires without asking for anything. Not the father who cried at sad animal movies and made pasta from his mother's note card recipe. Who was the man who left at night and came back with a taped forearm and an explanation that was just a little too polished? She didn't have an answer yet. But she had learned from years of building things that the questions you were afraid to ask were usually the ones most worth asking. December arrived with the kind of cold that turns everything quiet. The cafe was decorated with paper snowflakes Emily had made and taped to the inside of the windows. Caleb had put up a small string of lights at home that Emily had selected with great deliberation from a bin at the drugstore, half white, half the color she described as the good orange. It didn't match anything. It looked exactly right. There was an afternoon in early December when the city was still, and the snow was coming down in slow, unhurried pieces, and Sophia and Caleb were standing at the counter of his kitchen, making hot chocolate, while Emily was asleep in the other room. They weren't talking about anything important. He was telling her about the first apartment he'd ever rented on his own, barely 400 square feet, a radiator that knocked all night, a view of a parking structure. He told it like a good story, not a sad one. "Sounds like freedom," Sophia said. He looked at her. It was. A pause. "Even when I had nothing, I didn't feel like I was missing anything. I felt like I was about to find it." She understood that feeling. She had just never found it in an apartment with a loud radiator. The moment stretched comfortably, the way moments do between two people who have stopped working at conversation and started simply having it. Then Caleb set down his mug and said something quietly, without planning it. "I don't have much to offer," he said. "I know that. But whatever I do have, Emily, this place, this version of my life, it's real. I didn't build any of it to look like something. I just built it because it was what mattered." He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the small string of lights visible in the doorway. "I've never lied to Emily," he continued, "about anything. About her mother, about money, about why we live the way we live. She knows what's true, and I think that's the only thing I know how to give without question." Sophia stood very still. She was aware, in that moment, of the exact distance between what he had just said and what she was doing. He was standing in front of her, speaking the plainest kind of honesty, the kind that cost something. And she was standing there in a borrowed life, wearing a name that was close to hers but not quite, answering questions about herself, with half-truths, layered over half-truths. She wanted to say it right then, to put it down on the counter like something she'd been carrying in her coat pocket for too long. To just say, "There is something I need to tell you." But Emily made a small sound from the other room, and Caleb turned toward it instinctively, and the moment closed like a door easing shut. Sophia picked up her mug and said nothing. On the walk home, in the quiet snow, she made herself a quiet, private promise. She would tell him, not tonight, but soon. Before this became something she couldn't undo, she had told herself that before about other things. She knew how those promises tended to go, but this time felt different. Because this time, the lie didn't feel like protection anymore. It felt like a wall she was building between herself and the one thing she had come here to find. The snow fell without sound. The city held its breath, and somewhere behind her, in a small house with mismatched lights in the window, a man was putting his daughter back to sleep, not knowing that the woman walking away from his street was carrying a truth that could change everything between them. It was a Thursday morning, just after 7. Sophia was walking toward the cafe in the early gray light, her coat collar turned up against the cold, when she turned onto Caleb's street. She took it most mornings now, a small detour that had stopped feeling like a detour. She wasn't sure when that had happened exactly, but she had stopped examining it. She heard them before she saw them. A low collective sound engines idling, doors closing softly with the kind of solid thud that comes from vehicles built for security rather than economy. She looked up and stopped walking. 3 black SUVs were parked in a neat line along the curb in front of Caleb's building. Not the kind of vehicles that ended up on this street by accident. They were the kind that came with a budget and a reason. 4 men in dark suits stood on the sidewalk, and another was speaking quietly into a phone near the front door. All of them had the specific posture of people who were paid to be alert, shoulders back, faces forward, aware of the street in all directions. Sophia stopped at the corner and watched. The front door of the building opened. Caleb stepped out. He was wearing a charcoal gray coat she had never seen before, well cut, nothing like the washed-out sweatshirts and canvas jackets she was used to. He wasn't carrying Emily's school bag. He wasn't holding a travel cup of coffee. He looked like a different version of himself. Same face, same measured way of moving, but placed inside a completely different frame. One of the suited men stepped forward. "Sir, the board is waiting. We need to leave within the next 15 minutes. Caleb nodded once. He said something too low for Sophia to hear. The man nodded and stepped back. He looked down the street for a moment, and Sophia pulled back slightly behind the corner wall, her heart beating in a way she hadn't felt since the last time a major deal of hers had been in danger of falling apart. She watched him scan the street with the calm, habitual attention of someone accustomed to assessing environments. Then he went back inside. The men in suits waited. The engines idled. Nobody on the sidewalk seemed surprised by any of it. Sophia stood at the corner for a long moment, not moving. All the small things lined up in her mind in rapid sequence. The financial newspapers. The careful way he answered certain questions. The late-night calls. The practiced neutrality when she pressed him on something. The cut on his arm he explained too quickly. The way he sometimes paused before answering the simplest questions, as though measuring the distance between what he knew and what he planned to say. She had noticed all of it. She had filed it away. She had told herself she was probably reading too much into things that she was used to, looking for angles because she had been burned by people who had them, and that it wasn't fair to put that onto a man who had shown her nothing but straightforwardness. She had been wrong. Not about the straightforwardness, she still believed that part was real, but about the simplicity. There was no simplicity here. There had never been. She thought about the way he had spoken to the man in the suit. Not the way a man receives unexpected visitors, the way a man receives expected service. She thought about what he had said in his kitchen. "I don't have much to offer." She turned it over in her mind now with entirely new weight. What did that sentence mean? Exactly. When the man saying it was apparently someone for whom a board of people was waiting at 7 in the morning. She walked to the cafe on autopilot, set her bag down behind the counter, tied her apron, and stood at the espresso machine for a full minute before she remembered to turn it on. The question was no longer who was Caleb Turner. The question was why. He arrived at the cafe at 11, not at his usual 7:45. Without Emily, without the paperback. He sat at the counter and ordered a coffee without looking at the menu. And when Sophia set the cup in front of him, he didn't touch it. "We should talk," he said. Sophia had been preparing for this conversation in pieces all morning, had run through versions of it between orders. During the 10-minute break, she couldn't sit still through, standing in the back storeroom, holding a stack of paper cups and rehearsing openings that all sounded wrong. She nodded. "How long have you known?" she asked. Something shifted in his expression. "About you?" She stopped. "What do you mean, about me?" He reached inside his coat and placed a folded piece of paper on the counter. She recognized the format before she unfolded it. It was a printed profile. The kind assembled by someone whose job was to find out who people were. Her name was at the top. Not Sophie. Sophia. Sophia Elaine Grant, 29. CEO of Grant Technologies. Net worth listed in a range that had 7 figures as a floor. "I figured it out about 3 weeks after you started working here," he said. "I had someone confirm it." He said it without heat, without accusation. Just a man reporting what had happened. Sophia looked at the paper. She looked at him. And then she laughed, a short, strange sound that surprised even her. Not because anything was funny, but because there was something almost elegant about two people who were both very good at finding things out, failing to find out about each other until the worst possible moment. "The board," she said. He nodded. "Tell me." He was quiet for a moment, the particular quiet of someone deciding how much to give. Then he told her. His full name was Caleb James Turner. His grandfather had built a private investment fund starting in the 1950s, modest at first, then substantial, then quietly enormous over 4 decades. When his father passed away 11 years ago, the fund's management had passed to Caleb as the sole heir. He had been running it since he was 23. Not publicly, not with his face on any prospectus or his name in any press release. The fund operated through a network of holding companies and intermediary structures specifically designed to keep his name invisible. He had never wanted the attention. What he had wanted, after Emily's mother left when Emily was barely 18 months old, was a life that didn't make his daughter a target. Wealthy men's children were complicated propositions for people who made their living exploiting proximity to money. So he had built a quiet life, a real one. The maintenance work was real. The apartment was real. The 7:45 mornings were real. He maintained full operational oversight of the fund through encrypted communication channels and monthly travel, usually scheduled at night to minimize disruption to Emily's routine. He stopped speaking. Sophia had not moved. "So," she said slowly, "you were pretending to be ordinary." "I was living ordinary," he said. "There's a difference." "Is there?" He looked at her steadily. "You tell me." "You were pretending to have nothing. I was protecting something I actually had." The sentence landed precisely. She didn't argue it. She couldn't. Because she knew, sitting across from him, that he was right about the difference, even if the mechanics looked the same from the outside. She had been hiding from people who wanted too much from her. He had been hiding from people who might take something from his daughter. The motivations were not the same, but the result was identical. Two people who had been sitting at the same small table, eating pasta from a note card recipe, building something that had no foundation in the truth, because neither of them had offered it. She pushed her coffee aside. He hadn't touched his. "Now what?" she asked. Neither of them had an answer yet. The days after that conversation were quiet in the worst way. Sophia kept her shift at the cafe. Not because she needed to. She had never needed to. But because she didn't know how to stop. Stopping felt like admitting something. She wiped counters and steamed milk and watched the door. And every day at 7:45, the bell above it stayed still. Caleb didn't come. Emily didn't come. The corner table stayed empty, and Sophia stopped looking at it after the third day, because looking at it had a specific physical effect she wasn't willing to examine in public. She went home each night and sat in the apartment that she had rented as a prop for a story she had told herself about simplicity, and found that it had stopped being a prop somewhere along the way. The worn-down couch was comfortable. The window that faced the alley caught good morning light. The landlord had a cat named Gerald, who sometimes sat in the hallway. These were not the details of a life she had built. They were details that had built up around her while she was pretending. On the 5th day, Caleb called. "I'm not angry," he said. "I think you are," she said. A pause. "Maybe a little. Tell me." What followed was not a fight in the dramatic sense. There was no shouting, no ultimatums, no list of grievances delivered in sequence. It was harder than that. It was two people who were exceptionally good at managing information, trying for possibly the first time to stop managing it. He told her what had bothered him, and he chose his words carefully, the way he did everything. It wasn't that she had lied. He understood the shape of the lie. He had lived a version of it himself. What had bothered him was the gap between what she'd said and what she'd meant. In his kitchen, at that table, during the evening with the paper snowflakes and the mismatched lights, she had let him believe she was struggling, and not just financially, he meant something else. She had let him believe that what she was looking for from this life was what she actually had before she left, that the simplicity was something she needed because she had nothing else, and that had made him feel. And here he took a long breath like he had been the one being tested. Sophia was quiet on her end of the line. "That's what it felt like," he said. "Like I was something you were running an experiment on. Me and Emily." "That's not what it was," she said. But the moment the words were out, she wasn't sure they were completely true. It had started as an experiment, It had stopped being one somewhere in the middle, somewhere between the tire repair and the card game and the hot chocolate and the snow. But the beginning remained the beginning. She couldn't revise it. "I know," he said. "I know it became something else. I felt that too. But I need to understand, if you had never seen those cars, would you have told me?" She didn't answer immediately. She made herself sit with the question honestly. The way she made herself sit with financial forecasts she didn't like, without looking away from what they said. "I was going to," she said finally. "I kept putting it off because I was afraid." "Of what?" "That it would change things. That you'd treat me differently. That this," she stopped, "that the table and the pasta and Emily's drawings would stop being real." He was quiet for a moment. "That's exactly why I didn't tell you." It landed softly, that sentence. Not as an accusation, as recognition. They had both been afraid of the same thing. They had both chosen silence for the same reason. The protection of something fragile they hadn't wanted to risk. But silence had its own costs. She knew that now in a way she felt in her sternum. "I need some time," he said. "Okay," she said. She meant it. She owed him that much, the uncontrolled, ungoverned kind of time, without strategy attached to it. Sophia went back. Not to Caleb Street. Not to the apartment with the mismatched lights. She went back to Grant Technologies, took the elevator to the 42nd floor, walked through the glass doors, sat behind the desk that had her name on a small brass plate by the door. Her deputy had kept things running smoothly, as expected. The quarterly numbers were on her desk within the hour. 3 board members had called while she was away. 2 investors had questions about the product roadmap for the coming year. She answered every message. She sat in every meeting. She made every decision that was required of her. By Wednesday of the second week, anyone watching from the outside would have said she had returned completely. But returning is not the same as being back. She sat through a 12-person board meeting and noticed halfway through that she had been listening to the CFO deliver projections for 20 minutes without retaining a single number. That had never happened to her before. Not once in 7 years. She had always been the sharpest person in any room she sat in, and she had worked to stay that way. Now she was watching people gesture at graphs and thinking about a 6-year-old who had explained to her, with great seriousness, that card games you invented yourself were still real card games. She called her deputy into her office one evening after everyone else had gone. "Can I ask you something personal?" Sophia said. Her deputy looked mildly surprised. "Sure. Have you ever had something that mattered to you really mattered? Not professionally, and let it go because it was easier than dealing with what it would cost you to keep it?" Her deputy was quiet for a moment. Then, "Yes. Did you get it back?" "No." Sophia nodded slowly. "Thank you." She didn't go back to her penthouse that night. She went to the small apartment. Gerald the cat was in the hallway. She sat on the worn couch and looked at the window that caught morning light. And she let herself think about it clearly, without strategy, without risk assessment, without asking what the optimal outcome was. She thought about Caleb standing in his kitchen, saying he had never lied to his daughter. She thought about Emily at the corner table, with her coloring book. She thought about the drawing tucked under the cafe counter with her name spelled wrong, and how she had kept it because throwing it away had felt like a choice she wasn't willing to make. She was good at not being willing to make certain choices. She had built an entire company on the particular stubbornness that lived in the same place as that unwillingness. 3 weeks had passed. She was getting ready for bed on a Friday night when her phone rang. She didn't recognize the number, but she answered it. "Hi." Small voice. Very certain. Sophia sat down on the edge of the bed. "Emily? My dad doesn't know I'm calling," Emily said, with the matter-of-fact transparency of someone who had not yet learned the art of strategic omission. "I found your number in his phone. He had it saved as Sophie from the cafe, which I think is a funny way to save a number." "It is," Sophia agreed. "Are you coming back?" The question was entirely uncomplicated. 6 years old, with a gap in her front teeth and a total indifference to conversational preamble. "I've been thinking about it," Sophia said. "My dad is thinking about it too," Emily said. "He thinks about things for a very long time before he does them. Mom used to say it was his worst quality, but I think it's actually fine." Sophia pressed her hand flat against her knee to keep it steady. "What do you think I should do, Emily?" There was a brief, serious pause on the other end of the line. "Come back," Emily said, "but as yourself. Not the coffee shop version." Then she said goodnight. And the line went quiet. Sophia sat in the dark for a long time. Then she started making plans. Not the kind she made for companies. A different kind. She chose a Saturday morning. Not the cafe somewhere different. The small park 4 blocks from Caleb's apartment, the one with the bench beside the fountain that didn't run in winter, and the oak tree with the initials carved low on its trunk that Emily had pointed out to her the first time they walked there. She sent him a message, plain and short, just a time and a place. She wore her own coat. Not the second-hand wool one she had bought at a thrift store. In the second week of her experiment, her actual coat, charcoal gray, well-tailored, the one she wore to early morning meetings when the weather turned. She wore her own shoes. She carried her real phone, with the good case. She did not adjust any of it to look like something simpler. She arrived first. She sat on the bench and watched the dry fountain and thought about nothing in particular, which was, for her, a significant accomplishment. He arrived at 10 past the hour, hands in the pockets of the same coat she had seen him wear the morning the black cars came. He sat down beside her without greeting, in the way of someone who had already decided not to manage the conversation. They sat in silence for a moment. A pigeon walked past on the path with great purpose. Somewhere nearby, a child was arguing with a parent about which way to go. "I should have told you sooner," Sophia said. "Not just about the money, about all of it. Who I am, what I was doing. When I walked into that cafe, I had reasons. They made sense to me at the time, but I kept them past the point where they were still good reasons, and I let them become something else." She looked at him. "I'm not asking you to say it was fine. It wasn't fine. But I want you to know that what changed between fine and not fine, everything in between, was real. Everything I felt at your kitchen table was real. Emily's drawings are still under the counter at the cafe. I couldn't throw them away." He listened to all of it without interrupting. That was one of the things about him. He listened the way he did everything, without performing it. "I know," he said quietly. "I know it was real. I felt the same things." He turned slightly toward her. "I was angry because I thought I understood what you were looking for, and I found out I was part of the setup for it. But I've had enough time now to separate what actually happened from what I was afraid it meant." A pause. "What it meant was that we were both protecting ourselves. That's not nothing. That's just being careful. I don't want to be careful anymore," she said. "Not with you." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Who are you then? Without the careful." She thought about it genuinely. Not the version she gave to investors or board members or journalists who asked the question to make a story. The real version. Someone who kept a crayon drawing of herself wearing a yellow apron, she said. Someone who is very good at running things and very bad at belonging to them. Someone who came to a neighborhood she'd never been to before, looking for something she wasn't even sure existed. She held his gaze. And someone who found it. "I want you to know that. I found what I was looking for, and I want to stop running the experiment and just live in what I found." He didn't speak right away. The pigeon had circled back. The child on the path had apparently won the argument about which direction to take. "Then stop running it," he said. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't a speech. It was quieter than that, and therefore more true. They sat beside each other on the bench in the cold morning air, two people who had been extraordinarily careful with every other person in their lives, and who had decided, in the only moment that required courage, to stop. There was no performance. There was just the dry fountain and the carved oak tree and the ordinary Saturday light. And two people who had decided that being known was better than being safe. Emily was waiting at the apartment with a new card game she had invented. It had even more rules than the last one. Neither of them minded at all.